Yo, what's up, everybody? It's time for Fang. Is he gonna be good when he comes out in this next Brawl Pass? I don't know, let's find out. He is a pretty tanky boy at 6,750 health. My man El Primo, though, does have 9,000 health. So in comparison to some of the more tankier tanks in the game, he definitely doesn't really get close to them, but he is more tanky than someone like BB, who has less than 6,750 health. So it's definitely gonna be pretty easy to survive with him, especially since he doesn't need to get in close to charge his super, since he has the mechanic with his main attack that lets him send his shoes flying out in all different directions. Speaking of which, his main attack does 2,100 damage at close range, which has about the same range as pretty much every other melee brawler we have in the game. Now, 2,100 damage is a lot. 3 of those right up close, and you're dealing 6,300 damage, which is enough to easily kill most brawlers in the game. Now, El Primo does 2,200 damage per ammo, so he does do a bit more damage than Fang. I think Fang might have a slightly faster unload speed, but it feels pretty similar just from watching the video. So I think they'll feel pretty similar in terms of damage. And, you know, they're both tanks. El Primo just has a bit more health. And they can also both close the gap with their opponents by using their super. Now, before we get to the super, you need to actually charge it, right? And that's where that extra part of Fang's attack comes in, because, you know, he just has an infinite supply of shoes, apparently, so he can send them flying out if his main attack doesn't make contact with an opponent. Now, it does do a quarter of the damage at only 525 at max power level, but it does charge your super up 25%, just like a normal attack would, so you only have to hit 4 shoes from far away, and that's going to fully charge up your super, which is then going to let you get aggressive and do all the big damage that you really want to be doing with Fang. So that's a key aspect of his kit that sets him apart from all the other tanks. But then we get to his super, which, you know, lets him dash straight to an enemy. Obviously very good for a melee brawler, but there are a lot of other brawlers in the game that have similar abilities. You know, Colette has a dash with her super. You have a ton of brawlers who can just jump in on their opponents like Crow and El Primo, and then you have Daryl and Bull who also just go straight to their opponents. So is Fang's super actually any better than theirs? Well, in some respects, yes. Actually, in pretty much all of them. It goes a full 9 tiles, which gives you a lot of room to work with. That's longer than Daryl's super. And it gets to the end of the range in about 3/5 of a second, which is pretty fast. That's going to be faster than a lot of the other tanks that have these dashing abilities. Here's like a side-by-side comparison, so you can see how fast his super really goes. I'd say it's very similar to the speed that Colette uses with her super. And so because it's so fast, if you just auto-aim, you should be able to get your super off, even if your opponents are like at 5 or so tiles away from you. Any farther than that, and you're probably going to want to manually aim just to be sure. But being able to auto-aim a super with someone who has a really, really good super and who needs to use their super to get in close with people, it's probably going to be good. So the fact that it is fast is very good, because if it was slow, I don't think he would be that great of a brawler. So the bad thing about Fang's super is the fact that it can get interrupted. So if your opponents have any sort of ability that lets them stun people or knock them back, Fang's going to be affected by that, and he's going to be knocked out of his super, which, you know, it's kind of bad. That's kind of the whole point of the super, is to make it to your opponents. And so when they stop you, that's just a bad thing. And El Primo usually doesn't have to worry about that, because he flies through the air to get to his opponents, and your opponents aren't aiming up in the air because that would be broken. So when you're El Primo, you can just guarantee you're going to get to whatever target you aim at when you're using your super. But with Fang, it's not the same deal, because you could get interrupted on the way there. And if that happens, that's really bad news. So El Primo does kind of have Fang beat in a lot of respects, has a ton more health, has slightly more damage per ammo. His super does reach his opponents a little bit slower, but he does it in the air. And so he's basically guaranteed to make it to his opponents. Now, unfortunately, he doesn't have as many shoes as Fang does, so he can't charge up his super as easily, but he does have the tank trait that lets him charge up his super pretty quick. So honestly, I think he's pretty comparable to Fang in most respects, except for the fact that Fang also has one more good thing about his super, which is the fact that it can chain between enemies. So this, I think, is going to be the difference maker on whether or not Fang's actually good in the game, because without it, I think El Primo could be similar, if not better, than him. And El Primo right now he's not a bad brawler, but he's not the greatest or anything. So if Fang is at or below that mark, then he probably wouldn't be that good. But with this super chaining, I think he has the potential to be a very strong brawler. Whenever you hit someone with your super, you then target the next nearest person if they are within range, and you go and basically just use another super in their direction. And you could potentially hit everyone on your opponent's side of the field. You can hit up to 3 more targets, and so even though there's only 3 opponents, but if they have like a turret or something on the field, you can sort of chain with that turret as like a middleman and then go towards your opponents with the later parts of the chain. So this seems like a really good counter to whenever your opponents are playing turret-based brawlers, because it's usually pretty easy with just 3 people to stay far enough apart that Fang won't be able to reach you, but when there's all this other stuff on the field, you have to stay away from that as well if you don't want Fang to be able to reach you. And so I think he's going to be a great counter to those brawlers, which is something that none of the other tanks are able to say. And if your opponents are ever spawn trapped in Brawl Ball or literally any mode, they're probably close enough together and within range, so you use your super on one of them, and that just guarantees you a hit on every single one of them, as long as they don't interrupt you in the middle of it. So your opponent's not having the ability to interrupt your super, I think, is going to be really important in a match to whether or not you can get a lot of value with Fang. If they have a ton of abilities and like gadgets, and some of them has a super that like pushes you back, probably Fang isn't going to get that much value compared to some other tank that you would play over them, or just not a tank at all. And so in Power League matches, you gotta watch out for that, because Fang might not always be a good pick into whatever your opponents are playing. But I think in a lot of situations, you will be able to get value out of this super and the chaining that you get from it. And honestly, you get so many supers out of game that even if your opponents have some pushback effect, like in a gadget, like Ems or Jean, they only get that 3 times per match, and you're probably going to get way more than 3 supers per match with how easily this guy can charge his super. And I'm not even talking about his star powers yet, which I'll get to, which let him charge his super ridiculously fast. But I think this chaining super is what's going to make him really, really good. So if you're playing against a Fang, really got to watch out for it and stun or interrupt him in any way possible when he is using your super, and just stay apart from each other. It's really the only way you can prevent against it. Now, the thing about the super chaining is that it doesn't actually, when you hit someone, it doesn't go the full range of the super when heading to the next person. So the normal range of your super is 9 tiles, and if someone else is 9 tiles away from the first target you hit, it doesn't seem like they'll be in that range that'll let you chain and go to them next. From the training cave, I found 2 very close distances, one of which Fang was able to chain off of, and one of which Fang wasn't able to chain off of. So that means the max range, or the max distance that your opponent can be away from you when you hit your first target in order for you to chain off them and go towards them next, is somewhere between these 2 distances, and it comes out to just about 6 tiles. So I think if your opponent's farther away than 6 tiles away from where you make contact with your first opponent, you won't chain off of them. And so 6 tiles seems to be a good rule of thumb for whether or not you're going to be able to chain in between different targets. So keep that in mind when he comes out. I wouldn't expect that he'll be able to chain the full 9 tiles unless they decide to change him before he fully releases in the Brawl Pass. So with that, I think he's better than a lot of the tanks we have in game. The fact that he can charge his super easier than any of them, and then his super is also better than all of them, I think that's a very good sign for how strong he's going to be in the actual game. Not to mention that he has more health than some of them, and he does more damage than a lot of them too. The fact that he can only hit 1 person at a time and he doesn't have splash damage, I don't think is really that impactful, since your opponents usually aren't grouped completely on top of another that would actually make any difference. I mean, sure, in a few situations, other tanks would be able to do more damage if your opponents are all stacked on top of each other. I don't think that's going to happen much, especially in competitive games at higher trophies. Now, the other aspects of his kit are his gadget, which throws a bunch of popcorn everywhere. It's kind of good, I guess. It'll do some extra damage. It's kind of just like a very mini tick attack, but all around you. It's doesn't seem like it'll be that good, but it's like good to get damage. So, it is what it is. Doesn't seem like it'll be anything game breaking, gives you a bit of extra supercharge as well. But then his star powers are also really interesting. One of them gives him a shield every so often that'll reduce 90% of the damage from the next attack that you get hit by. So this can be very good in certain matchups. I think this star power will mainly be used in Power League when you know that your opponents are all running super high damage single target attacks, so that way you can get the most value out of the shields. It's probably not that good in general matches because there are a lot of brawlers that shoot multiple bullets that only do a little bit of damage each, so that the shield won't really get too much value. So I think the other star power is going to be more used in general ladder, and that's the one that instantly charges your super whenever you kill someone with your super. And it's just as simple as that. I mean, instantly charging your super whenever you kill someone. That's really good because, in high level competitive games, everyone takes their own individual lane, and it's basically a 1v1 for a large portion of the match until one team is able to get a significant advantage that they can converge on certain lanes and get more control of the game that way. But in a 1v1, having this star power is great because this lets you sort of get like a finishing move almost. You know, you can charge up your super with your long range attacks. The first time you get your super, you can go in on them, use a couple of the kicks, get them down, and then if they're not already dead, you can just use your super again and kill them, and then you're still gonna have your super. So I will admit, it'll probably be a bit hard to finish off people with your super, since the whole point of the super is to get you in a position where you can kill them, so you would have already used it by the time they're about to die. And also, if everyone's not laning and they're all sort of grouped up, then your teammates will probably be able to deal a ton of damage to them, and then probably one of them is going to be in range that you can just use your super and finish them off and instantly get it again after you have already chained through all of them. So you can just, it's insane how much damage you can do if they're all grouped up like that, and you have this star power activated, so he's gonna be scary, let me just say that. But overall, I mean, he's got stats better than a decent amount of tanks. I think El Primo is better than him in a lot of different stats, but in terms of his super, Fang is way better in terms of both what his super actually does and in terms of actually being able to get it, because he's gonna be able to farm a ton of supers, and that's what's gonna make him really, really strong. So be on the lookout for him. I strongly recommend buying this Brawl Pass. It's gonna be a good one.